Three children stood in the scorching sun of Dust Valley, burlap sacks over their heads, sold like they were worth nothing more than a few coins. Until a rugged cowboy named Jace Callahan stepped forward. What made him risk everything to take them home? And why did the little girl in the red dress whisper his name as if she had known him forever? Friends, where are you watching this story from today? Leave a comment below, I'd love to know. And may your day be filled with kindness and light. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the many more powerful stories waiting for you here. The sun sat heavy over Dust Valley, pouring down on Mesquite Crossing until the town seemed to buckle under the weight of heat and silence. Every board on the saloon porch creaked as if the wood itself was tired, and dust curled in lazy spirals across the single red clay street, clinging to boots and horses alike. It was a place where nothing grew easily, not crops, not fortunes, not hope. Yet people clung to it the way stubborn weeds cling to cracks in stone. And on this day, its heart beat hardest in the square, where voices pressed close together around a cruel spectacle. Jace Callahan reined in his horse at the edge of that gathering, tall in the saddle, with the kind of presence that pulled eyes even from those who tried not to look. His broad frame strong as weathered oak, his steel-gray gaze leveled at the commotion as if measuring its weight. He was a man carved by labor and loss, scarred by the fall of a brother from a canyon ridge and the fever that carried away the woman he once meant to marry, and since then, his laughter had been buried deep beneath silence and grit. Beside him, Onyx shifted restlessly, the black Mustang's amber eyes flashing with an unease that matched his master's, scar ridged along his flank, ears twitching as if the air itself carried warning. At the center stood Virgil Pike, auctioneer and opportunist, his shirt stained with sweat, suspenders straining, his thinning hair plastered back with grease, and his voice too loud, like a drunk trying to drown out conscience. Before him were three small figures bound at the wrists, burlap sacks tied cruelly over their heads, the words on a crude sign stabbing into the eyes of every passerby. Orphans, $10 each, no names, no questions. They swayed faintly under the heat, bare feet shifting in the dirt, as the crowd muttered in half disgust and half curiosity, unwilling to step in, but unwilling to leave either, as if tragedy had become theater. Virgil raised his knife to the air like a master of ceremonies and called out, $10 each. Strong enough for work, young enough to learn, no tears, no begging, just what you want. His laugh rang false in the stillness, bouncing off the faces of men who shuffled but said nothing, women who frowned but did not move, and children who watched from behind skirts with eyes too wide. The air was hot, the world was wrong, and Jace Callahan finally stepped forward, boots thudding on the dirt like a drumbeat no one had expected to hear. "Cut the sacks," he said, his voice low, steady, and sharp enough to slice through the hush. Virgil blinked at him, tried to smile, tried to regain his stage, and stammered about rules and buyers and curses. But Jace only repeated himself, the weight in his words turning the demand into command. The crowd leaned in, curious now, because Callahan was a man who rarely spoke, but when he did, the land itself seemed to listen, and Virgil, grumbling curses, dragged out his penknife and began to saw through the ropes. The first sack fell away to reveal a boy of about 12, tall but wiry, cheek marked by a fading bruise, brown hair chopped in uneven tufts, storm blue eyes fierce yet wary. His shoulders squared as though already braced to take blows, his stance shifting just enough to edge himself between the crowd and the smaller figures beside him, silent but defiant, unbroken. The second sack dropped, uncovering a boy of 9 with freckles scattered across his nose, his lips split, his brown eyes quick and restless, flicking over the faces before him, as if counting threats and searching exits at once. He rubbed his raw wrists, shoulders tense, the nervous sharpness of a child who had learned too early that survival meant staying one step ahead. Then came the last sack, and the hush deepened into something close to reverence. A little girl, no more than 7, with tangled golden hair dulled by dust, thin arms bare against the heat, and a faded dress that had once been red but now wore the color of rust. Her eyes, startling green, lifted to meet Jace's with a steadiness that seemed older than she was, and she whispered, clear and certain, "Mr. Callahan." The words rippled through the crowd like wind through grass, murmurs rising. "She knows him," someone said. "How?" But Jace stood frozen, his jaw tight, because though he had never seen her, the way she spoke his name carried the weight of prophecy. He crouched to her level, his voice rougher than he meant. "How do you know me?" The girl's small hands clutched the hem of her dress, her chin lifted though her lip trembled. "A woman told me, in a dream. She said you would come." Virgil barked a laugh too loud, tried to drown out the unease spreading like wildfire. "See? Cursed." But no one laughed with him this time, and the only sound was Jace's breath tightening in his chest as he straightened, turned back to Virgil, and said simply, "All three, $30. The auctioneer balked, sweat shining on his forehead, his voice cracking as he warned about trouble, about bad luck, about burdens too heavy to carry. The crowd leaned closer, whispering, half in awe, half in pity. But Jace counted out the silver coins without hesitation, their ring against Virgil's palm, final as a gavel. "Cut the ropes," he said again, and Virgil obeyed, each slice freeing not just wrists but something larger, something heavier that the air itself seemed to sigh beneath. The children stood awkwardly, rubbing wrists, blinking in the sunlight. Sam, the eldest, lifted his chin, his gaze locking with Jace's in a silent bargain of pride and suspicion. Noah, the freckled boy, shifted uneasily, but his eyes flicked to Jace again and again, as if testing whether strength could mean safety. Ellie, in her faded red dress, did not move away, did not look at anyone else, only held Jace's gaze as though tethered by something neither of them understood. A figure, pushed through the crowd then, sandy-haired, mustached, wearing the badge of Deputy Hank Lyle. His face was lined, weary with the burden of keeping peace in a place where law was thinner than dust, and his eyes carried both caution and care. He tipped his hat, his voice low enough for Jace, but loud enough for those listening. "Callahan, you'll catch more than dust bringing them home. Folks say they're cursed, say they don't last, say trouble follows them. You've lost enough already. Don't take more weight you can't carry." Jace's steel-gray gaze met his, unflinching. "Some weights are worth carrying." Hank studied him, lips pressed thin, then stepped back, warning left to the wind. The crowd began to scatter, their whispers trailing like smoke, some shaking their heads, others glancing back at Jace as if already retelling the story. Jace turned, guided the three children to his wagon, lifted Sam and Noah into the back, and watched Ellie climb after with steady hands, eyes never leaving him. He placed a canteen near them, but held back words of comfort, knowing too well that kindness too soon can wound children who had learned to distrust it. Mounting the wagon seat, reins in hand, he gave Onyx a light touch, and the black stallion surged forward, hooves drumming the dirt road as the wagon wheels groaned against the weight. Dust rose behind them, the crude sign, Orphans, $10 each, shrinking into the haze of heat and silence, a marker of what had been left behind. In the wagon, Sam sat upright, watching every doorway as if danger might still leap out. Noah curled tight with sharp eyes, restless, and Ellie, small hands folded, leaned slightly forward, her faded dress catching the last glint of the sun. She whispered once more, quiet as a prayer, yet firm as fate, "Mr. Callahan." Jace did not answer, but his jaw set and his breath came deeper, because for the first time in years he felt the weight on his shoulders not as a curse but as a reason, and as the road stretched ahead, lined with dust and silence, he knew nothing in his life, nor in theirs, would ever be the same again. The morning after Dust Valley's auction dawned clear and cold, the light catching on the red earth as though fire had licked the land and left it smoldering. Jace Callahan's wagon rattled along the ridge road, the three children sitting stiff in the back with blankets pulled close, eyes wide and restless as the ranch came into view. The Callahan spread was a lonely place, a weather-beaten house standing against the wind, fences sagging with age, a barn leaning at one corner, the corral empty but for the black mustang Onyx pacing with restless energy. It was not a home that promised comfort, but it was a place that stood, and that meant something in a land where so much had fallen. Jace dismounted first, tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat, every motion measured and calm as he lifted the children down one by one. Sam, the eldest at 12, carried himself like a sentinel, narrow-shouldered but determined, his storm-blue eyes always searching the horizon for threat, stepping down with a stiffness that made it clear he was braced to fight or flee. Noah, 9 years old with freckles dusting his face and lips cracked from worry, scanned the yard like a scout, his sharp brown eyes darting to the chopping block. The well. The axe propped against the porch rail. He moved lightly, always ready to spring back if danger showed itself. Ellie, the smallest at 7, wore her faded red dress as if it were armor, tangled blonde hair falling about her pale face. And when Jace's strong hands lifted her, she met his gaze directly, her green eyes holding steady, with a faith too strange for a child who had known only chains. The house smelled of smoke and leather when Jace opened the door, dust shifting in slants of light. He showed them the hearth, placed bread and dried venison on the table, and told them simply, "Eat." They obeyed quietly, Sam keeping one hand near his younger brother, Noah glancing often toward the windows, Ellie folding her small hands before touching food, as though asking permission from some unseen guardian. Jace did not crowd them. He moved to the stove, giving them space, knowing too well that comfort offered too quickly could feel like another trap. That night they slept near the fire, huddled under blankets while the wind howled through the shingles, Sam awake longer than the others, Noah twitching in half-dreams, Ellie whispering prayers no one else could hear. When morning light stretched across the ridge, Jace was already outside splitting logs, his shirt damp with sweat though the air carried a bite. The children watched from the porch, silent at first. Then Sam stepped down, shoulders squared, and tried his hand at drawing water from the well, grunting as the rope burned his palms, but refusing to stop until the bucket rose full and heavy. Noah trailed after him, scattering feed for the hens, his movements quick and nervous, flinching when wings brushed against his hands, muttering, complaints under his breath, yet continuing anyway. Ellie approached Onyx at the corral, her little hand stretching toward the black Mustang's flank. The horse tossed his head, ears flat with distrust, muscles tensing as though to strike. Sam leapt to pull her back, but Jace's voice cut firm across the yard. "Easy!" He stepped forward, set a steady hand on Ellie's shoulder, and let her extend her palm again. Onyx's amber eyes rolled, his nostrils flared, and then slowly, cautiously, the stallion lowered his head to breathe against her fingers. The air seemed to ease in that moment, and Jace knew a bond had been struck that words could not explain. By noon, he knew supplies were running thin. He could not leave the children behind, not on their first day, not while fear still shadowed every glance. So he hitched Onyx once more, loaded them into the wagon, and set off toward town. The ride was silent but heavy, each turn of the wheels drawing them closer, not only to provisions, but to the judgment waiting in Mesquite Crossing. When the wagon rolled down the main street, the effect was immediate. Heads turned from porches, whispers broke out in little gusts, and men straightened from where they leaned against posts. Jace guided the team steady, his expression unreadable, while the children sat close together under a blanket, Sam's jaw tight, Noah's restless eyes darting, Ellie clutching the edge of her dress with trembling fingers. Inside the mercantile, Gerald Wash, the heavy-set storekeeper with spectacles sliding down his nose, eyed the group over the counter. His voice was mild, but tinged with disapproval. "Callahan, didn't think you the sort to play nursemaid." Jace laid down coin for flour and salt without looking up. "Didn't think you the sort to speak what's not asked," he answered, calm as stone. Gerald sniffed, scribbled in his ledger, but when his eyes shifted toward the children, the mutter of judgment was unmistakable. Outside, the murmurs thickened. "3 of them, Lord have mercy," a woman whispered to her friend. "He can't raise wolves into sheep." A ranch hand laughed under his breath. "Callahan's gone soft. See how long before he brings them back." But not all voices carried scorn. An older woman clutching her shawl sighed. "Maybe it's what those young'uns need. Someone who won't give them up." Yet even pity carried the edge of doubt, and the weight of those stares pressed heavy on Jace's shoulders as he steered the wagon out of town. The children felt it too. Sam sat rigid, his fists clenched in silent anger, his gaze daring anyone to speak louder. Noah muttered curses under his breath, repeating the words he'd overheard as though spitting them back out. Ellie only leaned closer to Jace, her eyes wide but steady, whispering, "They don't know." Jace looked down at her, saying nothing, but the flicker in his gray eyes told her he heard. Back at the ranch, the air felt lighter, though the memory of whispers lingered. Jace handed tools to Sam, showing him the proper grip on the axe, guiding his stance with steady patience. The boy's thin arms shook with the weight, but his jaw stayed set, and though the log splintered awkwardly at first, he did not quit until sweat streamed down his face. Jace nodded once, a wordless acknowledgement that made Sam straighten with something close to pride. Noah was sent to gather kindling, grumbling at first, but returning with arms full, his quick hands learning to sort branches by size, muttering about doing it faster next time. Ellie followed Jace inside, helping fold linens, her small fingers clumsy but eager, her laughter spilling when she dropped a blanket twice in a row. That evening, the hearth glowed warm, stew simmering with beans and pork, the smell filling the little house. They ate together, slower now, the frenzy of hunger softened into the rhythm of shared meal. Sam's shoulders eased, Noah's restless eyes lingered on the fire rather than the door, and Ellie clasped her hands around her tin mug, whispering softly, "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." Jace did not reply, but he set another log on the fire and let the sparks rise, watching the way they lit the children's faces. Outside, Mesquite Crossing still whispered his name with suspicion, carrying rumors on the night wind, but inside the weathered walls of the Callahan ranch, something fragile had begun to take root. It was not trust, not yet, and not peace, but it was the beginning of belonging, and for the first time in years, the house no longer felt empty. The ranch sat quiet under the late autumn sky, its fences bowed with age, the barn leaning, the garden choked with weeds that had not been touched in years. Yet within those worn-out walls, a new rhythm began to stir. The day after Jace had walked his wagon through the gossiping streets of Mesquite Crossing, the children moved about his house not as prisoners, not yet as family, but as shadows who lingered closer with every passing hour. Jace Callahan, whose broad back had borne nothing but solitude since his father's death and his mother's prayers faded into memory, felt the change pressing on him like a storm waiting to break. That night, as wind scratched at the shutters and the fire flickered low, Ellie sat upright while the others drifted into uneasy sleep. Her red dress was patched but clean, her tangled blonde hair haloed by the glow of embers, and her green eyes, steady, almost luminous, rested on Jace with a weight far older than her 7 years. She whispered that she had known his name before he ever stepped into the square, not from lips, but from a dream. A woman's voice had spoken it clear as bells. "Jace Callahan will come. He will take you home." Jace's jaw tightened as though the words had struck bone. He had long buried belief in omens, hardened by loss and by the brutal arithmetic of life on this land. He remembered kneeling at his father's grave, begging the earth for a sign, and hearing nothing but silence. So he did not answer her right away. He only stirred the fire with the iron poker and muttered, "Dreams don't put food on the table, girl." But Ellie, small and certain, shook her head. "This one did," she said. And for the first time in years, Jace felt the uneasy pull of hope, though he wrapped it tight behind his silence. The following mornings broke with a new pattern. Sam, wiry and stubborn, tried to carry buckets from the well, straining until his thin arms trembled and the rope slipped, spilling water back into the dark. He cursed under his breath, cheeks red with shame, but Jace corrected his grip, steadying his stance without scolding, and together they hauled the bucket to the surface. Noah, freckled and restless, resisted chores with sharp words. "I ain't your ranch hand." But when Jace pointed out a broken hinge on the barn door, it was Noah's quick eyes that found the right nail, his small hands hammering clumsy, but eager. Later, when dusk fell, Noah left kindling by the hearth without being told, mumbling that at least they would not freeze. Ellie could not lift buckets or swing axes, but she carried life in other ways. She followed Jace from room to room, folding linens crookedly, singing half-remembered hymns, placing flowers she had gathered by the porch steps. Onyx, the black mustang with a proud head and watchful amber eyes, had at first flinched at her touch, ears pinning back, nostrils flaring. Sam pulled her away in fear, but Jace laid a calm hand on her shoulder. "Steady," he said, guiding her forward. Ellie's fingers trembled as she held them out, and slowly, almost reluctantly, Onyx lowered his head until his breath warmed her skin. The moment passed like a fragile truce, but it planted something in the yard stronger than fences. As days passed, the ranch began to change. Sam's persistence cleared weeds from the garden, his thin frame bent but unyielding as he tore roots from the soil. Noah, muttering about the unfairness of nails and splinters, nonetheless helped Jace set the fence posts straight, the sharp echo of his hammer marking progress. Ellie pressed tiny seeds into the dirt, her small hands dirty, her laughter bright as she announced, "They'll grow, you'll see." The barn smelled of fresh hay again, the floor swept clean, the dust drifting like sunlight instead of choking shadow. And when evening fell, the house no longer sounded hollow, for the children's voices filled the air like a hymn Jace had forgotten he knew. But not everything was easy. One afternoon, Noah threw down the bucket, water spilling across the yard, and shouted that he would not be treated like livestock. Sam lunged at him, fists clenched, until Jace stepped between them. His voice was calm but firm, his broad shoulders casting them both in shadow. "Work is not punishment. It's how you live. You think you're caged? Then learn the work, and the cage turns into land." Noah spat into the dirt, but later, when the others slept, Jace found the boy outside by the barn, straightening the very bucket he had thrown down. On the following Sunday, the bells of Mesquite Crossing rang faintly over the ridge, their iron voices carrying hymns the children no longer belonged to. Jace saddled Onyx and led them only around the pasture, not farther, keeping their hands steady on the reins. Sam rode stiff-backed, proud to sit in the saddle, though his legs shook. Noah shouted in delight when Onyx quickened pace, his laughter carrying high, sharp as a hawk's cry. Ellie clung close to Jace, her hair whipping against his jaw, her smile small but radiant. They did not ride far, but when they returned, the children's faces were flushed with something that felt dangerously close to joy. That evening, Jace cooked stew with beans and herbs he had kept for years in a tin box, waiting for a day worth sharing. The four of them ate at the table, Sam chewing with deliberate care as though proving his patience, Noah slurping noisily until Ellie giggled, her laughter rattling the walls. Jace leaned back in his chair, gray eyes resting on them, and for a rare moment he saw his ranch not as ruins, but as a place alive. He thought again of Ellie's dream, of a voice calling his name, and wondered if fate had circled back after all. When the fire burned low, Jace spread blankets across their shoulders. Sam curled protectively toward the others, Noah sprawled restless but unafraid, Ellie clutching her shawl like a talisman. Jace stood, long by the hearth, his broad frame etched in the lamplight, before finally allowing himself the thought he had feared since the day he buried his parents, that this house was no longer just his, it was theirs. And though Mesquite Crossing might still whisper against him, the whispers inside these walls had become the sound of belonging. The frost lay heavy across the Callahan ranch that morning, lacing the pasture in pale silver, crisping the air with a brittle stillness that made every hoofbeat echo. Jace had risen before the sun, the same as always, broad shoulders bent against the cold as he chopped wood and set the stove to burning. Behind him, life was stirring. Sam was learning to stack logs in neat rows, though his thin arms shook under the weight. Noah grumbled while patching a bucket he had kicked across the yard the day before, and Ellie, small in her red dress, was brushing Onyx's dark mane as though he were some noble king. For weeks Jace had felt something take root inside these walls, something dangerous in its comfort, as if the house might become more than his solitude could contain. He had not spoken it aloud, but he knew what it was. Home. It was near dusk when the sound of hooves came again, unfamiliar, sharp against the frozen ground. Jace stepped out onto the porch, gray eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. A chestnut gelding carried a tall, lean man across the yard, his black coat drawn close, his boots polished though the trail was rough, and at his side rode a second figure, shorter, stockier, with a scar cutting across his cheek and a rifle slung casually over one shoulder. The leader dismounted with the careful arrogance of a man used to getting what he demanded. His mustache curled at the ends, his eyes like cold iron. He tied his reins to the fence post without asking permission and looked across the yard as if taking stock of possessions. "You Callahan?" the man asked, voice smooth but hard. Jace's jaw set. "That's my name. You lost?" The stranger smiled faintly. Not lost. Come to claim what's mine. Those 3 young ones you hauled out of Mesquite Crossing. They belong to me. Bought fair, papers signed. Judge Hammond himself sealed the deal. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document, waving it with deliberate ease. Sam had appeared in the doorway, fists clenched though his thin body trembled. Noah hovered behind him, freckles stark against pale skin, his eyes wide but trying to look fierce. Ellie gripped Onyx's mane, the Mustang's ears pricked, sensing the tension, while her green eyes locked on the stranger with a strange calm. Jace stepped forward, taking the document without hurry. The seal was smeared, the ink clumsy, the signature an imitation he had seen before when men tried to buy cattle with forged notes. He studied it a moment longer, then folded it back with quiet finality. "This is a lie." The man's smile faltered. "You calling the law a lie?" "I'm calling you one," Jace said, voice low but steady. "Children aren't property, not now, not ever." The scarred accomplice shifted his rifle, his lips pulling into a sneer, but the leader held up a hand. "Careful, friend. You might think you're big enough to stand against one man, maybe even 2, but paper like, this carries weight. I'll be back, and next time, I won't ride alone." He tucked the false document back into his coat, mounted the gelding with deliberate calm, and turned toward the ridge. Best have them ready. Fighting the law never ends well. The sound of hooves faded, leaving only the creak of the porch boards beneath Jace's boots. Sam's voice broke the silence, rough and young. "He'll come back, won't he?" Jace crouched, his large hand steady on the boy's narrow shoulder. "Maybe, but he won't take you. Not while I'm breathing." Noah kicked at the step, muttering, "What if he brings more men?" "Then we fight smart," Jace answered, "and we fight together." That night, the fire roared hotter than usual, shadows dancing on the walls as though the house itself braced for a storm. Sam sat close to Jace's chair, trying not to show fear, but unable to hide the way his eyes darted to the window. Noah paced, restless, fists balled as though he could punch away danger. But his freckles stood out stark, betraying nerves he would never admit. Ellie curled by the hearth, her small face lifted toward Jace, her eyes full of certainty. She spoke softly but clear. "I dreamed your name before we met. I think that means you were meant to keep us safe." Jace's chest tightened. He thought of his mother, who had believed in dreams and signs, who had sung hymns while his father laughed at such things. He thought of his father's death, of burying both faith and family in the same earth, of vowing never again to let someone depend on him. Yet here was this small girl in red, her voice steady, her hand resting on his scarred knuckles, and he felt the weight of that vow begin to crumble. In the days that followed, the ranch grew tense but determined. Sam rose before dawn, hauling water, fumbling at first, but Jace corrected his grip and saw in the boy a stubborn reflection of himself. Noah was restless as ever, muttering complaints, but his sharp eyes often caught things first. A loose hinge, a rider passing distant on the ridge. When Jace grunted approval, Noah stood a little straighter, though he hid it behind a smirk. Ellie tended Onyx, brushed his coat until it shone, planted flowers near the porch even in winter, as if defying the cold itself. She was the soft thread that wove the others together, her laughter steadying what fear tried to fray. One evening, as the sky burned crimson and the valley shadows lengthened, Jace carried a wooden toy horse he had carved roughly from scrap pine. He set it on the table where Ellie sat. She picked it up, smiled, then asked without warning, "Did you ever want children of your own?" Jace froze, the question cutting deep. He had not spoken of such things in years. His voice came low. "I wanted a family once, but wanting and keeping are different. Life has a way of taking before you're ready." Ellie held the toy tight, her green eyes fixed on him. "Then maybe life's giving back now." Jace looked to the porch, where Sam sat sharpening a stick into something like a spear, Noah hovering nearby, pretending not to care, but never straying far. He turned back to Ellie, her small hand resting trustingly over his. And for the first time in years, Jace allowed himself to believe she might be right. The stranger's shadow still lingered over the ranch, every distant hoofbeat setting hearts tight. But within those walls, something stronger grew. Sam looked to Jace not just as protector, but as a man to emulate. Noah began to respect the lessons in silence and sharp eyes, and Ellie, with her quiet faith, stitched the broken parts of Jace's past into something new. By the time frost thickened across the pasture again, Jace Callahan no longer stood alone against the world. He stood as part of a family, fragile but fierce, bound not by paper or blood, but by choice. That night, when the fire burned low and the children slept tangled beneath patched blankets, Jace sat at the window, revolver resting on the table. He whispered into the cold air a promise he had not dared speak before. "They're mine, and I'll fight for them." The morning broke under a sky of low gray clouds that pressed upon the valley, as though warning of what was to come. Jace Callahan stood on the porch of his weathered ranch house, shoulders set, revolver resting in his hand, eyes sweeping the frost-hardened ground. The children had sensed the unease in him since dawn. Sam hovered near the door, his thin frame taut as a drawn bow. Noah tried to mask his nerves with restless pacing, freckles bright against his pale skin. Ellie, quiet in her red dress, stayed near Onyx, the black mustang, who pawed the earth with agitation, as if he too could sense danger riding closer. The sound of hooves broke the brittle silence. Jace's jaw tightened as he saw the same stranger from before cresting the ridge, this time flanked by 5 armed men. They rode hard, dust rising in sharp plumes, their rifles glinting under the pale light. The stranger pulled his gelding to a halt just short of the fence line, his curled mustache twitching with a cruel smile. "Callahan," he called across the yard, voice smooth and cutting. "I gave you your chance. Hand over the children, or Dust Valley writes your epitaph today." Jace stepped forward, broad chest rising slow and steady, revolver at his side, but ready. "You're not taking them. Not now, not ever. They're not yours to claim." The stranger smirked, raising a hand. One of his men fired. The shot splintered the fence post beside Jace, and chaos erupted. Jace dove from the porch, returning fire with the precision of a man hardened by years of necessity. Bullets cracked against wood and stone, the acrid scent of gunpowder filling the air. Sam pulled Noah down behind the water trough, shielding his younger brother with a determination beyond his years. Noah cursed softly, his fists clenched, but his sharp eyes darted constantly across the yard. "Jace, on your right!" he shouted, spotting a rifleman crouching low near the shed. Jace swung and fired, the outlaw collapsing into the frost. Ellie clung to Onyx's reins, whispering steady words to keep the mustang from bolting, her small presence calming the animal that shielded her and the brothers from stray fire. The gunfight raged, but minutes dragged like hours. Jace's revolver thundered, yet he was only one man against many, and the outlaws pressed hard. Just when the yard seemed on the verge of being overrun, the echo of hooves rolled from the ridge. Figures emerged, rifles and shotguns glinting in the pale light. The townsfolk of Dust Valley had heard the battle and gathered. At their head rode Sheriff Walt Danner, 60, heavy-set but steady-eyed, his badge shining even through the gloom. He raised his shotgun high and called out, his voice booming. "That's enough! Dust Valley won't be a killing ground today." The outlaws faltered, but their leader snarled. "You fools siding with him? A man who drags strays to your door?" From the crowd stepped Maybelle Ortiz, sturdy in her floral dress and apron, gray-streaked hair pulled tight. A heavy iron skillet in her hand, like a weapon she had wielded 1,000 times before. Her voice was sharp as flint. "They're children, not cattle, and Dust Valley won't stomach your kind." The outlaws fired again, desperate to hold ground, but now the townsfolk answered back. Sheriff Walt's shotgun boomed, dropping one man to the dirt. Young Tom Callahan, Jace's cousin with broad shoulders and dark hair, fired his revolver, his bullet grazing another outlaw's arm. Townsmen with rifles joined the fray, and even Maybelle swung her skillet with a resounding crack when one intruder dared too close. Jace fought at the front, every motion measured, every shot deliberate. He shielded the children with his body, never letting the attackers cross the yard. Sam, emboldened, seized a rock and hurled it at a man creeping near the porch, the stone striking his knee and toppling him long enough for Walt to disarm him. Noah's quick eyes caught another outlaw circling wide, his warning cry giving Jace time to turn and drop the man with a single shot. Ellie's calm hand on Onyx's neck kept the mustang steady, and the great animal reared once, scattering two men who had strayed too close. The fight stretched on, loud and furious, until the tide shifted. The townsfolk pressed forward, their numbers swelling with every passing minute. Outnumbered and outwilled, the outlaws began to retreat, dragging their wounded. The stranger glared across the field, spitting into the dirt. "This isn't over, Callahan. You've made enemies you can't fight forever." Jace stood tall, smoke curling from his revolver, his voice carrying clear. "Then let them come. They'll find more than me waiting." His words echoed as the townsfolk closed ranks, their rifles raised, their faces stern with solidarity. The stranger cursed, turned his horse, and fled with his broken men into the gray hills. Silence fell heavy after the last hoofbeats faded. The townsfolk gathered closer. Sheriff Walt dismounted, resting a steady hand on Jace's shoulder. "You stood your ground, son. Protected those children when most would have looked away. Dust Valley won't forget it." Maybelle Ortiz stepped to the children, kneeling despite her years. From her basket she drew warm biscuits wrapped in cloth. Sam accepted one with shaking hands, Noah grabbed his with a muttered thanks, and Ellie whispered a soft, "Thank you, ma'am," before burying her face in Onyx's mane. That evening, the ranch glowed with lantern light. Sheriff Walt sat with a tin cup of coffee, Maybelle bustled about serving stew, and Tom retold the battle with a nervous laugh, exaggerating his small part to hide how much his hands had shaken. The children huddled near the hearth, Sam recounting how he struck a man with his rock, Noah grinning wide as Jace clapped his shoulder for his sharp eyes, and Ellie curling close with quiet certainty in her gaze. Jace sat back in his chair, his broad frame weary but proud, watching faces that had once eyed him with suspicion, now turned toward him with trust. He knew danger might still linger, enemies may yet return, but for this night the ranch stood whole, the children safe, and Dust Valley had begun to see them not as strays or outcasts, but as a family. As the fire burned low and laughter filled the room, Jace allowed himself to feel what had long been absent from his heart. Hope. Spring light drifted over Dust Valley like a long-awaited mercy, softening the edges of the barren hills and turning the stubborn soil into something close to forgiving. After the gunfight that had nearly split the ranch apart, the town breathed differently, slower, more cautious, yet bound together by the memory of shared danger. Jace Callahan rose with the first light as always, his broad frame bent over the stove as coffee hissed, his movement steady, but weighted with the knowledge that his life no longer belonged only to him. Behind him, Ellie, Sam, and Noah stirred on their blankets near the hearth, no longer guests but a part of the air he breathed. Ellie, slight and serious in her red dress stitched at the seams by Maybelle Ortiz, slipped outside to brush the black Mustang Onyx. The horse, proud and scarred, lowered his head to her gentle hands, as if the little girl had become his keeper. Sam, tall for his age with dark hair and determined eyes, followed Jace into the fields, eager to prove his strength, gripping the plow handles as if each furrow was a vow. Noah, freckled and restless, stayed nearer to the porch, humming tuneless songs, chasing chickens, laughing too loudly, though his eyes still darted for shadows when the wind pressed against the windows. The ranch, once a husk of forgotten boards and cracked earth, began to breathe again. Neighbors who once kept their distance trickled toward it. Maybelle came with bread and broth, scolding Jace for working himself into the ground, while her apron swung with purpose. Gerald Wash, the shopkeeper with thinning hair and wary eyes, muttered suspicions in town about orphans making trouble, but even he softened when Ellie shyly returned his dropped spectacles one afternoon. Small gestures rippled through the valley, shifting doubt into reluctant respect. One Sunday, Sheriff Walt Danner arrived with folded papers in his saddlebag. He was 60, his belly soft, but his eyes sharp beneath his weathered hat. He stood before Jace at the table, the children watching wide-eyed, and spoke without pretense. "These are from the county judge. Sign them, and by law, you'll be their father. No more whispers, no more uncertainty." Jace held the pen, his hand steady though his heart roared. He hesitated, not because he doubted his love, but because the finality carried weight. Then Ellie laid her small hand over his, green eyes unwavering. "You already are," she said. Sam lifted his chin and nodded once. Noah whispered, "Please." The pen scratched across the paper. Jace Callahan. A name he had signed countless times, but never with such gravity. The children exhaled as if a bond long, carried in silence, had now been spoken aloud. The town did not let the moment pass quietly. A gathering was called at the churchyard, lanterns swinging from posts, benches lined with faces familiar and skeptical. Reverend Moore, a thin man with white hair and a calm voice, read the decree aloud. From this day, Jace Callahan is father to Ellie, Sam, and Noah. Some clapped, some only bowed their heads, but no one spoke against it. Gerald Wash stood with arms folded, his frown deep, yet when he saw Noah clutching Ellie's hand, he tipped his hat almost imperceptibly. That evening, Jace led the children to the edge of the tilled field. He placed a spade in Sam's hands, a packet of bean seeds in Noah's, and a young sapling in Ellie's arms. Together, they pressed soil, tamped roots, and set the fragile tree upright against the fading light. Roots take time, Jace said, his voice carrying the hush of memory. But once they hold, they don't let go. This land, this home, will hold us too. Sam's jaw tightened with pride. Noah patted the earth eagerly, and Ellie smoothed the soil with delicate fingers. Days bled into weeks, the valley changing with them. Sam worked beside Jace, his lean arms straining against the plow, his eyes burning with the will to shoulder more than his years. Noah found a stray pup near the creek, ribs showing, eyes bright. He named him Scout and fed him scraps until the dog grew sturdy, barking sharply at strangers who strayed too close to the ranch. Ellie drew pictures with charcoal on scraps of paper, always sketching the cabin, the mustang, and 3 figures standing beside Jace. Each evening she showed them to him with shy pride, and each time his chest tightened with the truth that he no longer lived for himself alone. Storms came, fierce and sudden, rattling windows and shaking beams. One night, thunder cracked so close, it threw light across the walls, and all 3 children rushed to Jace's side, fear raw in their eyes. He wrapped them in his arms, his voice low and steady. Storms pass, they always do. What matters is, we face them together. Outside, Onyx stamped his hooves and Scout barked, but inside, warmth swelled against the roar until the storm faded to a murmur. The town began to see them not as strays, but as kin. When Gerald Wash's wagon overturned on the north road, Sam and Jace pulled it upright, while Noah calmed the spooked horse. Ellie, clutching Scout at her side, helped gather spilled goods. Gerald said little, but the next morning he brought flour to the ranch without charge. Respect grew not from declarations, but from deeds. By summer, the ranch bore fruit. Rows of beans and squash bent under their own weight. Corn reached higher than Noah's head. Sam's muscles hardened with labor. Noah's laughter rang brighter, and Ellie's voice carried soft songs across the yard. Jace, once silent in his solitude, found himself laughing more, his scars no longer chains, but reminders of what had been overcome. The high point came with a town gathering, lanterns strung across Dust Valley, a fiddle playing lively reels, tables spread with stew and pies. Children ran barefoot through dust, while men and women lifted mugs in cheer. Jace stood near the edge, Ellie perched on his knee, Sam leaning against the fence, Noah chasing Scout in wide circles. The people who had once whispered now nodded in greeting, some even clapping him on the back. Maybelle pressed a loaf of bread into Ellie's hands, tears shining in her eyes. "You've got yourself a family now, Jace Callahan," she said. He only nodded, words lodged too deep in his chest. Later that night, when the noise had faded and the lanterns dimmed, Jace stood at the cabin door. Ellie leaned against him, Sam and Noah already asleep within, Scout curled at their feet. He looked across the field where the sapling swayed, its leaves silver in the starlight. For the first time since loss had hollowed him out, Jace whispered not to the past, but to the future. "You're mine now, and I'll never let you go." Sometimes the greatest miracles are not thunder from the sky or voices in the wind, but the quiet gift of a family being born out of brokenness. Just as Jace and the children found a new home in Dust Valley, God reminds us each day that love can grow even from the hardest soil. In our own lives, the miracle of the Lord often appears in small moments of kindness, in the courage to forgive, and in the strength to protect one another. May this story remind us that no one is ever too lost for God to guide them back, and no family is ever too broken for Him to restore. If you believe in that miracle, share this story with others. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss more stories of hope and faith. And as we close, may the Lord bless you and your loved ones with peace and protection. If your heart agrees with the message of this story, write one simple word in the comments to show your faith. Amen.